Does any London cabbie go south of the river? Do we actually have to learn the knowledge? Isn't every London cabbie secretly minted? Well, in this video, I'm going to be sharing the answers to all of those myths, plus many more. Let's get started. So to kick things off, the first myth is that every London cab driver is a middle-aged man who watches football and enjoys an afternoon on the golf course. Now, of course, I'm an obvious anomaly to that. I'm 32 years old. In my mind, Manchester United have just won the treble.
Champions of Europe, champions of England, winners of the FA Cup.
And I don't really enjoy racket sports. But we can find exact demographics provided by Transport for London. So, as of December 2023, here's some of the figures. Male to female split. Now, yes, sadly, 97.5% of London cab drivers are male. Yes, just 2.5% of our driving force is female, which I don't quite understand because there's loads of female bus drivers. And the flexible working nature of being a London cabbie means that if you want to go fully into career, you can do that. If you want to take time off, have breaks, raise a family, you can do that as well. It's perfect, really. Age demographics. 87% of London cab drivers are aged between 39 and 68. Over 15,000 drivers. Okay, so it's pretty damning. Most London cab drivers are middle-aged men, basically. And it gets worse. 7% of London cabbies are over 69 and just 5.5% are under 39. Obviously, it's going to be outliers here. You can apply to go on the knowledge at the age of 18, but you can only start driving a cab from the age of 21. My taxi driver colleague and fellow YouTuber, Mark Monroe, has actually found a lady in her 70s who is currently doing the knowledge. So in terms of outliers, I think she's definitely one. But what that chart doesn't display is how long that driver has been driving for. You know, you just see a middle-aged cabbie and you just think, wow, he's been doing this for decades. But one of my colleagues is in his 50s and we was call-over partners together. On the face of it, you would look at him and think, cool, he's probably been driving a cab for quite some time. And you look at me and you think, well, okay, I've not had enough time to drive a cab. But we both have exactly the same amount of time on the road experience. And there's no real way to discern this. Yes, you can look at the badge number, but the badge number doesn't give an indicator exactly when that driver came out. That was just when that badge was issued. And as many drivers have either lost their badges or had to renew them when their old one has lapsed, that can cause numbers to be much higher than what they actually are. Do we actually have to learn the knowledge? Some people, I think, when they get in my cab and they see me, they think it's some kind of bygone era that, oh, do you still have to do the knowledge? Like that was some arbitrary thing that happened years ago. They surely can't still do that. And yes, we have to. You'll know my journey, that it took me almost 3 years to complete the knowledge. And most decent knowledge students, if you get a good schedule behind you, you can get it done in about 2 years. But there is a curious thing with the knowledge, and it's not quite what you think it is. How many streets and roads do we have to learn? I'll suspend that for a little bit, have a think, how many roads and streets do we have to learn, and I'll reveal the nearer true answer by the end of the video. Every London cabbie is loaded. They've either got a big house, they've got a house in Spain, you never see a poor cab driver. There is a little bit of truth to this. It's a working class job, but with kind of middle class salary. And I think people kind of either don't accept this or can't quite get their head around it. The other thing with driving a cab, it's one of the only jobs in the world where you start at the top and you finish at the bottom. A cabbie is the most free, the most richest once they get their badge, because they come out here, they're brand new to the job, especially if you're young like me, you get kind of addicted to this idea that you can just come and work when you want. And of course, you've got money coming in, it all feels good. Then you do things like put yourself down for a mortgage, get yourself a cab on finance. All of a sudden you have all these obligations, all these things to pay out for, and you're now chasing the money. A little bit different from what it was when you first started out. And yes, you might see the odd cab driver with a nice house in central-ish London, but you don't have no indication of when they bought that. That might have been 40 years ago when that area was quite desolate and run down. Some people did relocate and move to Spain, but these are all kind of like circumstances of the time. I don't think it's quite as easy to do that now, especially with the way mortgages and just general overall cost of living is going, even the cost of the vehicle. I think what truly happens is that cabbies will generally work to their needs. Once you've got a kind of rhythm or a pattern going, you just don't go beyond that. So some drivers might be well dressed because they highly value that. Or like me, I like a bit of travel, and it might seem really rich and luxurious that I can just take time off of in the week, or I can go away for 2-3 months at a particular point of the year. But all I'm really doing is just shifting my hours around to make that kind of lifestyle suit me. So you don't see necessarily what goes into that, the long shifts, the long weeks that make up, the saving to go away on a big travel like that. At the end of the day, if we were all minted, we wouldn't be out here driving cabs. We'd be at home, feet up, or maybe we'd be on the golf course. Now, speaking of hobbies, I find it's really important to be able to take time out of work and really engross yourself in something that makes you forget about work, forget about the stresses and mundanities of life. But what if you don't have that? Well, that introduces the paid partnership of today's video, and that is BetterHelp. BetterHelp provide accessible and effective therapy suited to your own individual needs and your lifestyle. I know at times when I've had lots of work going on in terms of this YouTube channel, trying to get in as many shifts as possible out in the cab to help cover my expenses, it can be a very lonely job. And it also feels like you don't have the time to stop and physically have a breather or maybe catch up with friends. And that's where BetterHelp can be an effective tool for individuals. To get started, just go to their website using my link, which is betterhelp.com/Tom Hutley. And from there, BetterHelp will ask you a few personalised questions to match you with a professional who has years of experience with people who have struggles just like yours. The best thing with the service is that it's designed to be accessible. So you can do it all from the comfort of your own phone. You can start with messaging if all of this is completely new to you, before maybe going on to voice calls, video calls with your therapist as you get further along your journey. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you using my link, which is betterhelp.com/Tom Hutley, or choose Tom the Taxi Driver during sign up. And also, you'll get a special discount on your first month. Big thanks to BetterHelp for supporting this video. And now let's find out some more juicy myths about London cab drivers. The myth that every London cabbie lives in Essex. I haven't got any specific demographic data on this, but I'm pretty certain the majority of cabbies do live in Essex. Many passengers can probably back this up for me as well. And I have heard of Essex being referred to as Green Badge Valley. But I can also anecdotally confirm this. When I lived in Buckinghamshire, so out west, when I'd come in on the M40, it was almost a rare sight to see another cabbie on the M40. You'd see one and you'd actually make note that you saw a cab driver, and you almost kind of gave each other like a little bit of a nod, like, all right, mate, what are you doing out west?
Fancy seeing you here.
Whereas on the M11, A12, A13, you always find cabbies. It's that north-east kind of area of the North Circular. Generally, the east end of London was the kind of more working class area of London. And of course, south as well. As London got more and more expensive, or people sold up their family homes they maybe grew up in London, they just moved just a bit further east, a bit further south. Because you can stay near family and friends as well. And a lot of garages were based in the kind of east and the south as well. But there are cabbies all over. Surrey, Berkshire. There even used to be cabbies who would live abroad and they'd come back for a few months in the summer, just hit the summers really hard. But I would say, overwhelming majority, Essex. That we don't go south of the river. Look, in my previous point, we've learnt that London cab drivers are from all over. So invariably, if a cabbie didn't want to go south, how would they ever get home? This should probably be the truism of cabbies just don't want to go where I want to go. In decades gone by, and in times when work has been, quote, good, cabbies might have turned down jobs. And the premise for this is that if they get dragged all the way south, let's say they go down to Lewisham or somewhere like that, the likelihood of them getting a job to come back into town is very low. So it's kind of in their business interest that if it's busy in town, they'll want to stay in the centre. Now, due to compellability of hiring, cabbies are not allowed to refuse jobs under 12 miles or a job that can be completed within an hour. There's not really a lot of difference in, say, getting a job going down south, turning around, and then coming back into town. Like, you can't ascertain how busy it will be in town if you turn down that job south. Generally, and the best rule for it, the only rule, is that when you're done with working, you turn your light off. Simple as that. Or you rely upon the apps because they can help you choose the direction you want to go. You haven't got to be hailed down by a customer and then disappoint them and go against licensing conditions by saying, sorry, I'm not going that way. The general law of sod is that it doesn't matter where in London you live, chances are you're not going to get the correct job in the correct direction. When I lived out west, I would always end up in the east. When I lived in the east, I'd always end up west. Now I live in north, you guessed it, I always end up in the south. Fundamentally, you just don't know where you're going to go. It would be very nice if all the jobs brought you into town and took you home. But life isn't like that. There is a lot of luck to driving a taxi. Don't want to get the bad results? Turn the light off, drive on home. What was the original point? Cabbie's not going south. No, there shouldn't be cabbies don't go south of the water. That should be some older dog cab drivers don't like going in certain directions at certain times of night. That's probably the better myth. If it's raining, oh, that got rid of all the light. Then you're going to be mega busy. If the weather is piss poor from the outset, then I find people generally don't come into town. Or if they do come into town, they come a lot more prepared. They'll have the umbrellas, they'll have the jackets, etc. It doesn't really faze them. If, however, it is a blinding summer's day, everyone's wearing t-shirts and shorts, and it absolutely lashes it down, then yes, there is a mass hysteria for cabs, especially if you're in places like Oxford Street. That in itself doesn't make it, quote, busy. You might just have that period of hysteria where you get a job. Once you get a passenger on board, well, I've got passengers on, so it doesn't matter if the whole of Oxford Street is hailing me down. I can only deal with that one passenger or that one fare I currently have. And by which time, when I've dropped them off, I might be out of the zone where the hysteria was, the rain might have stopped, or more than often, people realise, oh, I'm not dying. Another way of looking at it is that if it's a day where it's raining, maybe there's like a 5% increase in demand for people wanting taxis. So I might not have to go around for as long before I finally get a job. Doesn't mean that, oh, it's raining, I'm going to be earning 2 times the amount of money I normally would. It would just mean that I have a little bit better luck out on the streets. Now, I don't dislike the rain. I certainly don't dislike cyclists. The idea that cabbies have complete beef with cyclists. All it is just another occupational hazard. It's something to think about. I don't care if a cyclist is obedient and waits for a green light. I don't necessarily care if they jump a red light. What I mainly care about is that they're not kind of inconveniencing me as a cab driver. I've got to weigh up the fact that when a passenger gets out, that the door's going to open. Has that cyclist, had a look at my cab and thought, someone might be getting out of that taxi. They might not have. So I've always got to be thinking about this because it is my responsibility of where I'm stopping to ensure that my passengers get out safe and they don't perturb other road users. I think thankfully that kind of myth of like, oh yeah, cabbies v cyclists has gone. And I think if you speak to a lot of cyclists, they appreciate that cab drivers will give them the space, that we are professional drivers, and that maybe the other mob are the not so good drivers to really look out for. Relating to our standards of driving, there is the myth that us London cab drivers hate Uber drivers. No. We hate Uber.
Uber is an unfit and improper regulator.
Secretly lobbied UK politicians.
Controversy.
They exploit their drivers.
Never stepped in an Uber car, would rather put pins in my eyes.
Not the drivers. Because at the end of the day, anyone I share the road with, one way or another, is just wanting to get around. And other professional drivers are just out there to earn a pound note, like me. It's a bit like Starbucks. I don't particularly like them as a business and how they structure themselves to avoid paying tax pretty much globally. How they pay their employees, basically minimum wage, and give very little staff benefits for that. I know, I used to work for Starbucks, and generally, the coffee ain't even that great. Does that mean I hate people who work at Starbucks? No, they're just normal people who are just out there to earn a job. Like, I'm sure they probably think the same way about that massive company as I do. Uber drivers probably think the same way about Uber and how they take too much of a cut off their paycheck. If I have a disdain for Uber drivers because they're in a similar line of work to me and they're sharing the same roads as me, well, I could easily extend that to Royal Mail drivers, UPS drivers, lorry drivers, right? They're all moving some kind of cargo or person or transport around London. So it's a really flawed logic that I would hate someone for doing that line of work. It's like a fellow cab driver looking at me and thinking, oh, he's out to nip my work. Or you look at it from the point of view of, we're all doing the same job, let's help one another out to ensure that we can provide the best service. It's a good metaphor for life, really. Just help anyone out, be useful, and you will live a much easier, stress-free existence rather than walking around with a massive chip on your shoulder because you don't want to associate with a certain kind of person. Anyone who does that, you're only mugging yourself off. Cabbies are crap drivers. No, I would argue that London cabbies are inconsiderate drivers. Left to my own devices, when I've got a passenger on board and I know exactly where I'm going, I will pick exactly the correct lane, know the sequences and phases of the lights, and if I know the destination I'm taking them to, I will already have the ideal set in mind, i.e. where I'm going to drop that passenger and how they're going to get out of the taxi. But where the problems arise is when the passenger doesn't quite know where they're going and they change their mind mid-journey. Or they'll throw a spanner in the works and go, oh, actually just do a right here, driver. Because I then have to sort of react, hopefully not in a too drastic way, being able to control my speed and then appropriately assess the conditions and then take the correct turn in that the passenger may want. A little bit of stress sprinkled in, a little bit of passenger expectations shouting at you, maybe trying to get a conversation in whilst you're still kind of calculating the route at the very, very beginning. That is where issues can arise. The taxi game is dead. Some people said that the taxi game was dead when they put roofs on the open top buses. Some people said that the game was dead when we didn't get access in the bus lanes for the Olympics. Some people said the game was dead or the writing was on the wall when we were mandated to take credit cards.
This game's finished. Always has been. You're better off on the dole.
Let me tell you, the game is never dead, but the rules of the game and how we play it always change. The cost of the vehicle, credit card fees, paying to drop passengers off at Heathrow Airport, low traffic neighbourhoods, 20-mile-an-hour London. There is always something that's always constantly evolving and changing the game. But the game will most certainly never be dead. The very last point, and the most contentious of all, is that we have to learn 28,000 streets and roads in London and potentially 100,000 points of interest. This is, unfortunately, a myth, because this is a map of London, but it's not even Greater London. If you count all the streets and roads in the Greater London area, that is very close to 28,000. And don't forget, of these streets and roads, you have lots of little insignificant roads, cul-de-sacs, things like that. We most certainly don't learn all of those. When you do the blue books, you learn the 320 runs, you'll have about 3,500 roads as an estimate. And probably when you finish the knowledge, you'll end up on about 7,000, but not 28,000. So all the journalistic entities always spout this. Oh, cabbies have to learn 28,000 streets and roads. No. Potentially, we can be asked any point of interest, any road within London, but that would be far too improbable for me to know the small cul-de-sac down near Southfield Shopping Centre called Neville Gill Close, Chancery Mews, Smallwood Road, Worslade Road, Hexham Road, Ardooly Road, Isgarth Road, Boxall Road. It would be impossible to learn all of those. So cab drivers haven't. So that's that, the myths of being a London cabbie debunked. But there's a lot of truth to this job as well, such as, why are our cabs black? Well, I'll leave that video on screen here and you can find out exactly why.